Yeah. Oh yeah, no, yeah, not me. Yeah, you're right. All right, webinar is being recorded.
Oh, it's just not. Oh, you don't.
Yeah, I'm in. So if you, all right, so we want to show the, how do we pin? We want to maybe pin this. No, you got it.
Okay.
Because you're the webinar, you're in charge too.
All right. So we have Standard TV and mic and camera. All right. So I need to get it as.
I don't, oh, there, she hasn't joined yet. I am, yeah. All right. Oh, I can't do that. A minute.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're not recording.
Is 7 I joined the screen recorded by that post? So I'm recording and it's recording.
Yeah. I need to. Whatever, maybe we should do that. Just mute our mic just in case. Full Yeah, they're ready to go.
We're going to call our regular school meeting to order. It's April 25th at 7:02 p.m. And our meeting is in person at 29 Highland Avenue. Welcome back, everyone, and welcome back, Ann. I think your first school committee meeting in person. I will go ahead and summarize our public participation policy. But before doing that, Ms. Manning asked for a moment of personal privilege.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a minute, since it's the first time that we're back in person, to just mention all the folks that we lost over the last couple of years that we did not get a chance to acknowledge, that belong to the Salem Public Schools community, picking family members of students and staff, retired staff, students, everyone that would had a part of our community. I just would like to just spend a moment thinking of that.
Thank you for that, Ms. Manning. Continuing on our agenda, the Salem School Committee would like to hear from the public on issues that affect the school district and are within the scope of the committee's responsibilities. Spanish interpretation is available for anyone who needs it. For instructions and public comment, there is a location on our agenda on our website that you can submit a form, and I understand we have some public comment that would like to speak here this evening. At this time, I would entertain a motion to approve our agenda. Motion made by Mr. Cruz, seconded by Ms. Manning. All those in favor? All those opposed? The ayes have it. Approval of the consent agenda. Entertain a motion at this time. Motion made by Mr. Fleming. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Manning. All those in favor, say aye. Actually, we don't have to say aye. I can actually count hands now. So all those opposed? None. 6 members present, 6 in the affirmative. I'm sorry, Dr. Pangallo. I can't see if you're voting in favor of these things. So you can just let us know. If our school committee secretary could help us with keeping track of that, that would be great.
I'm not sure she thinks she's participating as a participant.
Okay.
Because she's not a panelist. I think she's in the audience.
Okay, got it. Public comment. This is the opportunity for public comment. Anyone who would like to address the school committee will have previously submitted a request to do so via online or may do so here at this time. If you could just come forward, give us your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, Barbara McKernan, 25 Sunset Drive, Peabody, Mass. So good evening and welcome back. So good to be here. The Salem Teachers Union annual fundraiser for the Salem High Scholarship has started. The raffle calendar with prizes every day from May 1st to May 31st went live on Saturday. This calendar raises money for 4 $1,000 scholarships that we give to the Salem High seniors. If anybody would like to enter, the entries are $10 a piece. You can enter by Venmo. You can Venmo to @STU Events, or you can send cash or check to 10 Colonial Road, Suite 12, Salem, Mass. That is the Salem Union Hall. You can see the calendar at the Salem Teachers Union Facebook page, and soon it will be published on Parent Square. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Any other members of the public who'd like to offer comment? We do so at this time. Seeing none, I will move along in our agenda to the superintendent's report and turn it over to you, Dr. Joyce. And before doing that, I just want to thank you and your staff who set up our hybrid meetings to make it possible for us to be able to maintain participation from parents, families, students at home, staff members, and student members as well, while also allowing us to be back in person. Feels great.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to thank everybody who helped put together this hybrid meeting. Mark LeBlanc is here and Carlos is here, as well as Jensen, who's at home, and Mindy Marino, who's at home as well, worked really hard to try to put this together. We know that we're still experimenting with the audio, and we've ordered some better equipment for our next meeting. So it may be a little choppy tonight, but it would help if everybody just speaks as loudly when they they speak tonight so that the folks at home can hear. We also are providing interpretation to families in person, if some people want to come in person, or on Zoom. That option is available to people, and so our interpreter is available for that. I do, first of all, I want to, it's a momentous meeting for me, my first time in since I interviewed this behind this desk, I think. And so my first school committee meeting in person, and yeah, really looking forward to like getting back to some sense of normalcy. I would be remiss though if I did not ask that the committee just take a quick moment of silence. We did lose a student prior to the April vacation, Mr. Brian Gomez, a New Liberty student, and I know he attended Salem High School and the Salem Public Schools his entire career. It's a devastating loss for this community, and so I just would ask that we all take a moment of silence in what was a very tragic occurrence. Thank you. And my thoughts and prayers to his family and his friends and the New Liberty community. I want to extend my gratitude to the New Liberty staff who were there for kids right as the tragedy happened. It speaks to the commitment that they have and the relationships that they have with our young people. So I want to express my gratitude to that community. At this time, I do want to welcome everybody back from April vacation. I hope everybody had a chance to rest, relax, and recharge it's hard to believe that May is next week. And so with this time of year comes our budget season. And so what Mr. Lai and I will be presenting the budget here tonight, a proposed budget. Again, it's only a proposal. There is some important context around state aid that we're going to talk about a little bit tonight, and the city finances. We want to make sure that folks have that information. Remember, this is the first presentation. There is a budget hearing next week before the school committee meeting, and then the school committee doesn't actually vote on the budget until May 16th. So there's almost a month of time for there to be discussion and feedback and input on the budget. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. I did also want to thank our school leaders who I'm now looking at on my computer, who are all here, our principals, and some of our department heads who are here in the event that there are questions. Really appreciate them after their long day to be present with us in the event that there are questions. And they feature prominently in the development of this budget. So with that, I think it's on the screen there. Let me just, all right. Okay. So I'm going to start us off and then Mary will pick up from there. And there's a lot of information here. I did send the committee a copy of this presentation before the meeting. It's also going to be available on our website this evening if it's not already. I know Liz was posting it. So again, as a school district, we're guided by our values. And as you know, a couple meetings ago, we established our core values. They were a work in progress. There's something that we've been working on for a while: belonging, equity, and opportunity. All of you know we have a strong commitment to equity, and this is the lens through which we want to look at the way we commit our resources and how we invest as a school community. And so I want to call the committee and the public to what those three values are. Again, belonging, equity, and opportunity. And our tagline as a district is where belonging leads to opportunity. As a reminder, that's the lens through which we will talk about this budget. We have 4 priorities that we shared last year with the community. It came from the strategic plan that was already in place when I arrived. We just sort of lifted it and narrowed the focus a bit. The first is around investing on our educators and leaders. Supporting the adults who work with kids is really important, and nurturing our staff. The second is around priorities around academic excellence. At the core of our work is we're an academic institution, and we want a strong experience from pre-K, and pre-K is obviously intentional now that we have many pre-K students all the way through post-secondary. And obviously we have many young people who are enrolled in post-secondary experiences through our early college and dual enrollment programs. Number 3 is featured very prominently since the pandemic, is the need to have systems of support for our students and our families, social emotional needs, mental health needs. It's why we created the position that Mr. Colantoni is in around having a director of student services and family supports. And then finally, how do we operate more efficiently as a district? How do we design and run our systems efficiently and equitably is our 4th priority. So I just want to call people to that. And then with each of these priorities is a series of work streams or initiatives, and those are listed on the screen in front of you, or on, up on the, well, if you're on Zoom, you can see it on Zoom. So we have a series of initiatives that are driving our work, and those haven't changed, at least in the last year. And so we wanted to align our work to those initiatives. As a system, we're working really hard to move from inputs to outcomes. And as a school system, we've done a lot. We do a lot. Sometimes we do too much, and we hear that from people, right? We're constantly trying to do things, a lot of initiatives, which but as a system, we have to move from just focusing on inputs to outcomes. We want to know that what we're doing is actually making an impact on young people. And so we're really trying to push the system to look at outcomes. We don't want to do things or invest in things that are not going to lead to results for the young people we serve. And that's something we all have to get better at. And I think education in general, we just think by doing a lot and doing a lot of tasks and initiatives like that equals success. No, success is when we see improved outcomes for young people. And we set up a series of metrics, some outcomes, right, around these 4 priorities. And it's hard to read here, but many of you know we've been focused on increasing the number of pre-K seats, decreasing chronic absenteeism. We want to look at obviously academic outcomes, the percent of Salem residents who attend school in the Salem Public Schools. That's another metric we're looking at. And then dropout graduation rate. These are some of the core outcomes that we want to know that our investments are helping to improve. And this year we set out on an ambitious journey where we wanted to make sure that our schools improvement plans and the district's improvement plans were aligned to these priorities and metrics that we've set out, right? A couple of meetings ago, we talked, and at our retreat, we talked about this process that we had developed where schools and the district leadership team were developing a series of initiatives related to the priorities and action plans that we would progress and monitor all throughout the year. And ultimately, we want to get to this notion that this work is about informing the budget. The budget isn't some sort of like separate process that just overnight develops because a couple of people sit in a room and say we're just going to roll the budget over from the year before or invest because we think we like these things. We want to do more of this. It should be connected to our progress or our lack of progress in certain areas. And so on this chart, you can see that we, from the beginning of the year, we set out the calendar here where schools developed improvement plans in the summer and fall. The district had developed improvement plans. And then we had a series of step backs in January with schools where we looked at where their progress was and where they were making progress toward their goals and their outcomes, and then areas where they still needed to improve. And we ask schools at that moment in time to start thinking about how how that information would shape their budget priorities. And that became the beginning of school leaders proposing their priorities for this upcoming school year was these step backs. And the same thing we did as a district team is we looked at some of our outcomes to say, okay, here are areas where we're making progress and here are areas that we're not. And that helped form inform the budget development process. And so, just let me get off. I got to be able to read my screen here. And so this talks a little bit about the step back process. We ask schools to take their improvement plans, to take their what we call their big rocks, their priorities, and tell us, were they on track? Were they halfway on track, or were they off track? We didn't expect everybody to be green. We expected there to be a mix of progress from schools. And so we wanted them to report on how they were doing, to reflect on what the data was telling them, and then begin planning for next year. You don't start planning for the upcoming school year in the summer. You start planning now. People should have a foot in this school year and another foot in next school year as they're starting to plan. And that's something we all need to get better as a system. We can't just wait to the end of the year and then hustle over the summer to start planning. We need to start thinking about the initiatives and plans for the upcoming school year. This is just an example. Liz Rogers is on this Zoom, and I spared her having to share on Zoom here tonight, but this is just an example. We're spotlighting Bentley Academy. They had a series of 4 big rocks or initiatives that they were working on. And as part of the step back, you can see their takeaways from that are on this slide. And they felt like they were on track with 2 of their initiatives, way off track with chronic absenteeism, which is not a surprise, and that they had mixed outcomes related to their academic and continuous growth. And that's why you see a green and a yellow there. But I only show this not because I want people to read every single word on this, but this is the process that we went through with every school so that they could articulate out how they felt they were doing as a school. And they sat with the district leadership team. Some of them brought some members of their staff with them for the conversations as well. Now, shifting from the schools to the district, we have a series of outcomes that we're looking at as a district, and we've asked schools. We had a series of key metrics that we wanted to look at, and asked schools to align to the district's priorities in these areas. Attendance was one, and we had an ambitious goal, which before we knew what COVID was going to look like this year, decreasing chronic absenteeism from 25%, which was a pre-pandemic number, to 20%. We're very off track there. And then around racial equity, we had a very clear goal around increasing the percent of students who report that they learn about, discuss, and confront issues of race, ethnicity, and culture in school. And we use our Panorama survey, which we give students annually to look at that. And then we now have we use STAR as a metric to look at growth in math and ELA, which is correlated to MCAS growth in some way, not because we want to whack schools over the head or teachers over the head with that data, but because we want to see how kids are progressing throughout the year. And MCAS is a post-mortem. We get that information too late to do anything with that. STAR actually gives us information quickly so that we can plan for for students in the moment, in real time. And then finally, we also look at not just growth, but changes in proficiency from beginning to middle to end of the year. And so I want to give you all a snapshot because this data is important as we budget plan. And as a committee, I think you should get used to seeing more data about our school performance, not just at the end of the year, but throughout the year. Here's our chronic absentee data, which is is unfortunately not where we want to be. And through April 2022, which is this month, 31.4% of our kids are chronically absent. Now, many of you know January, we absolutely took a bath with chronic absenteeism, but these numbers are still concerning. And I am worried. I was just talking to the superintendent in Beverly about this. They've never seen chronic absentee numbers like they've seen before. It's one of the reasons they're moving towards City Connects next year, because of the chronic absentee numbers. We're all seeing, but these numbers were concerning pre-pandemic, right? And so it's something we have to own as a district. And while that's why in the corner you see red, yeah, we didn't hit the goal. Being honest, we didn't do it. I think there's a lot of factors in place, but we need to do better as a community. And especially as we hope that illness, although I don't know if the world will ever be the same around illness, we used to tell people to come in no matter what, right? To school. It's something that we obviously need our kids to be in school more often. If they're only in school a third of the time, very hard to meet grade level standards, regardless of who the teacher is and what happens in school. You got to be present, to be effective in school.
Dr. Zweig, can I just talk?
Sure.
For a second? I'd love to see the data. Obviously not this evening.
Yep.
That breaks down grade, And if we have a reason for absence, obviously COVID wreaked havoc in
Yep.
January. Trying to better understand by grade, by school, and if there is a rationale for the absence.
Yeah.
We have that.
We do, and we can certainly do and we can do information, we can provide more information on
I
attendance.
think it would be helpful
Sure.
for us to have the same data that you're looking at to better understand what strategies we want to put in place.
Sure.
Thank you.
And then around racial equity here, we labeled it a yellow. We felt like, again, we saw some important gains from spring 2021 to fall 2021 when we gave the panorama, and we exceeded our goal for grades 6 to 12 in terms of how often students learn about, discuss, and confront issues of race, ethnicity, and culture in school. These were the questions that we used to gauge, and we saw an increase from 38% to 55% in grades 6 to 12. However, we were flat in grades 3 to 5, right? So that's an important data point. Kids are seeing that there's more discussions about and relevance around the topics they're discussing related to race, ethnicity, and culture in school. I think that's a significant gain in grades 6 to 12, not so much in grades 3 to 5. So that's important information as we, start planning for the upcoming school year. Again, this is another data point we're looking at. This is the STAR assessment that we introduced this year, right? And this is by grade level. You can see we would like to see at least a 50, a growth percentile of 50 at every grade level. We start off pretty strong in grades 3 and 4, and then are close in grade 5. The data isn't as strong as we get into middle school and high school. And I'm not here to indict anyone. This is just matter of fact data, and it needs to direct how we use resources moving forward. The data isn't as especially in reading, isn't as strong in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Something that we need to look at, what the reasoning behind that is. It's the first time we've given the assessment. We have a lot to learn. Not every child who took it in the fall took it again in the winter. But so we're only getting growth percentiles for the students that took it beginning to middle of the year. Again, important data point for us to use, and it should inform how we plan for the upcoming school year. I think of additional note in this, and that's why this we coded this as a yellow. We felt like we had made some moderate improvement, but not where we want to be. Here's achievement, overall achievement from beginning to the middle of the year. So this is much more current than the MCAS. You can see where the growth is in grade level. And the good news is we saw growth. The target shifts from the beginning to middle of the year in achievement, right? And so we've set it at the 40th percentile, and that's what the STAR suggests doing. And you can see the shifts. In many grade levels, especially in math, we made a lot more improvement from beginning to middle of the year. We also had the most to gain in math because we saw students decline more in math during the pandemic than in reading. But the data is less promising, again, not given what we just saw in growth in the middle school and the high school grades. We saw less improvement, and in some cases, we saw decline in improvement in the middle and the high school. You see big gains, though, in some of the younger grades from beginning to middle of the year in terms of above proficiency benchmark. In early literacy, we saw a lot, but reading and math as well in some of the early grades. We have the breakdown by school. We can look at it by grade level. This is important information, only again to show that this is the kind of data that we should be using to drive these conversations about how we use resources. I don't know if anybody has any questions about anything thus far data related. And you have plenty of time to look at this. I can provide more reports for you if you'd like. Yes.
Ms. Campbell?
Oh, sorry. I shouldn't be calling on people.
It's a new thing.
I'm new at this.
Okay. I just had a quick question. Actually for both reading and for math, are we taking advantage of STAR's ability to assess in English and Spanish? And is this their higher language, or is this all English data?
I think it's all English data, but we have taken advantage of using it in Spanish as well, and we should be using it more than we are, not just in the dual language, but for young people who are coming across the board. Yeah. Good. Yeah, great point. that's one of the advantages of STARS. You can take the assessment in Spanish. I'm not sure about Portuguese though, and Andre's not able to be on. Chelsea's saying no. Okay, not available in Portuguese, but in Spanish it is. Okay. All right, so now we're going to shift more into the nuts and bolts of the budget, but I did want to just share, we did have a series of community. So not just the data that we collected. So that's, you saw some of the information that we collected on student outcomes, but we also talked to the community, and we had a series of forums in January that were ESSER forums, but in those conversations, we heard a lot from the community about the kinds of investments that they wanted to see. And then we had 3 budget forums in March. These, I wouldn't say that the forums were the best attended forums I've seen. The staff forums were well attended. We had a larger group at the staff meetings that we had both in January and March. And what you see on here is a list of things we heard from the community. Again, I would say this leans more heavily towards what staff felt, but we got a lot of, people wanted to see continued investments that we've made. They want to see more out of school time programming. There were some people in the in our forums that were from community partners like LEAP, Boys and Girls Club, and just in general, people wanted to see more out of school time programming, social emotional learning, mentoring, flexible furniture, training, curriculum, were all things that came up in the meetings. Mental health supports that we hear over and over, that there's long lines to wait for mental health. They wanted to see more targeted social groups, telemental health. That's something I know Adam's been discussing, as well as how do we begin looking at some of those options. People wanted more professional development, DEI. We got some feedback that people like that. There's some positives about the equity imperative, but they don't love the asynchronous nature of it. They'd like to see more, they'd like to have more dialogue led in their schools. And so that's important feedback that we need to take back. They'd like to see more learning that engages students. There's a huge push for project-based learning, but then career and technical education. We heard a lot about the demands for CTE. Our numbers at the high school are through the roof in terms of demand. We heard that from a lot of folks, the folks that came to these sessions. People wanted to see the continued transformation of the Parent Information Center. They knew that that was something we talked about, but we haven't delivered on that yet. So that came out. And then the other things I heard is, we heard about building maintenance, cleanliness. We heard about gifted and talented programs, more support for technology, access to books. They wanted kids to have more access to quality text. And then there was folks that talked about special education inclusionary practices. So that's what we heard in the forums leading up. I did want to note, and again, this is hard for people to read here, but the prior investments, these are all the investments we made last year as a school district. In these 4, again, these are our 4 priorities, and these were some of the investments we made both on our operating budget and in ESSER. And we got a lot of feedback that said, please continue those. If you take away some of these investments that you've made, some of them on ESSER, some of them were not, but certainly like kindergarten paras, we heard a lot about, don't take the kindergarten paras away. They will, keep investing in dual language, pre-K. People wanted to see a continued investment in pre-K. So there was a lot of conversation. It was just like, don't like now stop and pull this away, because that's sort of the cycle that people are concerned about, is not investing in some of the things that we use some of our ESSER dollars to do. And our intention is to use our ESSER dollars to continue to invest at least for the next 2 years, but knowing that eventually some of those things will we will not be able to continue to fund some of those after two additional years. I did want to note that as we go into Mary's presentation, I do want, if people ask, so what's new in this budget proposal? And I want to be clear that these are some of the things that this budget proposal, which is the initial proposal, and it is subject to city finances. It's also subject to what our state resources will be. But a couple of things that are prominently in this budget that we felt are aligned to what we heard and what the needs are as a district. One was tuition reimbursement for paraprofessionals. That was had not fully funded. That there is a line item in there that came through our negotiations last year. That was something, and again, that's aligned to investing in our adults. So that's one very important investment. CTE is prominently in this budget. We are investing or proposing to invest more staff in our career technical programs because of the demand that we see from the students at Salem High School and New Liberty and Salem Prep. This is about, we want access for all students across the district. So that's a big part of this budget, which Mary will talk about. Special education programming. We did invest in an additional separate class here at Collins. We had some need for a teacher, additional paraprofessionals. Linda, remind me, that's ASD class, which we had previously been eliminated. We added that back into the budget. The continued expansion of dual language, which we discussed regarding Bentley School a few meetings ago. That's part of this budget. Sustained funding for the high school community office, which the high school has really embraced. The community office at Saltonstall to provide credit recovery and extra support for young people, and the staff has been great in stepping up in evenings to support kids, but there's a cost that comes with that. So that's in this budget. More professional development around for mental health and SEL. We're going to continue to work with Jessica Minahan. There's investments here also to bring in additional curriculum and professional learning for staff in an area where they have been, Adam came in last year, didn't have a budget to his department. And so we wanted to provide him with, not him, but his team with resources to be able to provide additional support for schools. It doesn't include additional nursing support. We have a student who's moving in who requires a one-to-one nurse, and then additional adjustment counseling at Salem Prep, which was something that was requested by the school. We want to expand middle school alternative programming. So this budget does allow for New Liberty to be provided with an additional staff member so that they can provide middle school instruction for a small group of middle school students. It does have funding for additional preventative maintenance. We made a lot of progress on some of our HVAC systems and other maintenance across the district. We want to make sure we continue to fund that. And finally, our additional support for custodial maintenance and technology staff. I want to point out, we need to move some of the things that are in ESSER that are on our are part of our maintenance, extra custodial support. We now have full oversight over Bertram Field. We need extra support to maintain Bertram Field. And Mark and his team, Mark's over here in the corner, will now also be absorbing all of technology, including the staff facing. That was previously on the city side. So we are adding, his team will be taking on all student devices and, already has student devices, but we'll be taking on staff devices. So there is staffing for that to be able to happen in the upcoming school year. Okay, with that, I want to turn it over to Ms. Delai, who's going to share with you a little about the budget context. And that's a fresh picture from last week's Acceleration Academy. So there you go. You'd like us to fund drums based on that photo. Okay.
That looks like an inexpensive drum. Thank you. I hope to go a little bit deeper into the story behind our budget and our budget development, and share with you some of the budget drivers and also some of the actual detail of the requests that were made in terms of what's been funded in the recommended budget. So here are some of our budget drivers, and I think it's really important to take stock of these budget drivers. Contractual obligations, obviously staff is a big part of the cost of running our school districts. It's 80% of our budget is our personnel expenses. And so fulfilling those obligations that we have to staff is a significant portion of our budget. And overall compensation for educators, which is a big driver of our budget just because of the size of the staff that we have here, is 3.8%. And so that drives a big part of our budget. The second budget driver, the structural deficit, the FY22 budget was underfunded in terms of what the final contract settlements were. So there's a 500,000 sort of structural deficit in the FY22 budget. And so as a result, it looks like, because of the rebound with the salary increases, it looks like the increase to the budget is a little bit higher than if that structural deficit had been addressed through, say, a supplemental appropriation. We have significant enrollment and demographic shifts, and while our enrollment overall is going down, our enrollment for our low-income students and our multilingual learner students is increasing. And so while we see overall enrollment going down, we see needs increasing, and not just academic needs, but social emotional needs. The superintendent mentioned the additional money for preventative maintenance. We've invested a significant amount in our HVAC systems over the last couple of years to make sure that we can provide the necessary levels of ventilation and to try and provide consistent heating and cooling where possible. And in order to maintain those gains, we need to make those investments in the preventative maintenance. Funding inequities, equitable does not mean the same thing as equal, and so we need to make sure that as we're allocating dollars, that the dollars are following student needs. Strategic priorities and initiatives, you saw the step back process and how the budget process is part of that step back process. So those priorities and initiatives really were used to prioritize the requests that were made. And then we have federal and state mandates, things like IDEA and McKinney-Vento, that we are required to provide services to students. And so we have to fulfill those mandates as well. So talking a little bit more about enrollment, I think it's pretty common knowledge that the overall enrollment in Salem Public Schools has declined, and it's declined pretty dramatically over the last decade. You can see a 20% drop in enrollment from high of close to approaching 5,000 to 3,065 was our October 1 enrollment of this year. And that's a complex, I know a lot of people like to think we're losing students to Salem Academy Charter and Essex Tech, and while that's certainly part of the equation, we've also seen significant declines in birth rates. We've seen migration out of the state and out of the region due to the cost of living in these areas. So it's not just loss of students to some of the other choices. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So looking at student demographics and student populations, this is from our DESE website from October 1. 56% of our students are classified as, well, our students of color. And so this really makes the priority for diversification of our educator workforce, our general workforce. That makes that a very urgent priority for us. And 71% of our students are designated as high needs, which means they fall into either the low income students with disabilities or ELL classification. So obviously we want to make sure that we're addressing the needs of those students. In terms of educator demographics, this chart shows the distribution of our educators on step and column according to the collective bargaining agreement. What you can see is the majority, obviously, of our teachers hold at least a master's degree. You can also see that about 54% of our educators are on the top step, and 46% of our educators are on steps 1 through 12. So what that means is the top step get the negotiated increase. Again, we did not budget sufficiently in 22, so it looks like for compensation increase, those who are on top step 13, received a 4.5% increase, just because the FY22 number is lower than what it should be. And similarly, for the 46% that are on steps 1 through 12, they are receiving a 1.75% COLA, but with the adjustment for last year, plus the step increase, on average is a 6% increase for the teachers who are on step. That's compensation increase. So you can see with those types of increases, why we are seeing a significant increase in our sort of level service budget.
On the next slide, I spoke to this when I talked about the demographics, student demographics, which is that we, this is the disparity that we're seeing between our students of color and our educators and staff of color. On the next slide, you will see revenues. This has to be a big part of our conversation we realized this year, which is the fact that we rely on a significant amount, $26 million from the state, 27% in Chapter 70 dollars. And oftentimes, and as we've seen in the past, that Chapter 78 has increased as the needs of students and enrollment has increased. But this year and last year as well, we received only a 0.5% increase. And when I say this year, I mean the preliminary number for FY23 only has us receiving an extra $130,000 in Chapter 70 monies. So that's a significant significant challenge in terms of making up, the revenue gap for the budget. So we are talking about this more with the state, advocating for more dollars. But as one of the gateway districts, Salem has received a 0.5% increase, whereas all the other gateway districts on average received a 12.95% increase in Chapter 70 dollars. So this is a big challenge for us for the current fiscal year.
Mary, does your next slide put that into dollar form at all? That 0.48% increase is
$130,000.
Thank you.
Yeah, 130, less than 130, it's 125 and change. And that was similar last year. We also received that increase. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what's driving that. Not go too far into the weeds on the Chapter 70 funding formula, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. We are fortunate in that we have ESSER funds, and we relied heavily on ESSER funds. Total, we have been awarded $15.8 million in ESSER funds. There's 3 rounds of ESSER funding. You can see that we've spent pretty much all of the ESSER 1 money. That was funding that we received started in 2020. We had until September of this year to spend that, but that was pretty much exhausted at this point. For ESSER 2, we've expended 84%. We expect that we'll have the entire ESSER 2 amount spent out by June 30th. And we have started to spend our ESSER 3 money, which we were awarded in October of this past year. That was the biggest allocation at $9 million. So of the $15.8 million we've been allocated or awarded through ESSER, we've spent 5.9, almost $6 million of it, with 8.5 remaining. And we do have until September of 2024 to spend those remaining dollars. A big part of that, you can see some of the things that have been funded. A big piece of that funding is going to the pre-K and preschool expansion between the positions of 4 classrooms that we're offering, and also providing the subsidies to some of our partner programs to expand programming throughout Salem. We're looking at about $1.2 million to continue that into next year, and then another $1.2 million into the following year. So that's going to take up a significant amount of those resources. Looking at our comparison to our gateway peers, we spend significantly more than any of the gateway peers that are in our region, almost over $5,000 more. And you can dive in here in terms of the results, but we look at this data to just sort of determine the efficacy of our spending and to make sure and to check, are we getting the outcomes for those investments? Next slide is our budget overview, and what you can see is the total increase that we have in our recommended or proposed budget is 4.6%. That's a little over $3 million. If we did adjust for that $500,000 structural deficit in 22 through, say, a supplemental appropriation, then that increase would have been 3.8%, which not coincidentally is equal to the amount of compensation increase attributable to our educators. The personnel budget is 3.6% of that increase, and you can see the breakdown there. 2.3 million of it is our contractual increases. That's significantly more than what we were looking at last year this time as we were putting the budget together. And again, part of that is under budgeting in 22, but part of that is also just the contractual increases that we're paying. Also $1.78 million in new requests, but there were also, and I can't highlight this enough, there were a significant amount of savings that were found through either using offsets that we have or by prioritizing some positions over other positions and reallocating and shifting those salaries accordingly. Similarly, if our non-personnel budget is increasing by 8.5%, and most of that is contractual, but there were also about $877,000 in new requests. And when I say contractual, I mean some of the more non-discretionary increases, things like our tuition, our transportation, our natural gas, our electricity. Those are sort of non-discretionary expenses. And the bottom part, you can see some of the additional offsets that we relied on. We were fortunate to have carried forward our entire circuit breaker allocation that we received this year. So we have that entire amount to offset our budget for next year. That's over $1.9 million. We've tapped into our school choice funds. We've seen school choice enrollment increase. We've opened more seats. And so we want to make sure that we're using that to help offset our budget. We tapped into the special education tuition revolving fund. That is tuition that we collect from students primarily who attend Salem Prep as district placements who tuition into Salem Public Schools. And then facility rental, and those are the revenues that we receive for renting out our facilities. I know you can't read this level of detail, but this just breaks it down by cost center. And you'll see in a subsequent slide that significant amount of the resources here that are being requested for FY 2023 are going to schools as opposed to district-wide departments. If you want to advance that.
I'll
slide.
go forward. Okay.
This is a snapshot for you of each of the schools. All of our school leaders and department heads presented to the finance subcommittee over the course of 3 different nights, 2 hours plus worth of presentations. So I'm just giving you a real high-level snapshot here of what's driving some of the individual cost center increases. And I just want to kind of quickly step you through those. At the Early Childhood Center, the biggest driver is additional paraprofessional hours. They're going to be expanding their programming to 5 days for most of their programs, and that's going to require additional paraprofessional coverage. At Bates Elementary School, there is a need to add an additional multilingual learner teacher due to the numbers of students who actually moved in this year, and we expect to retain next year 31 additional students. And also an increase of 0.4 music teacher to help cover the specials for the 2 additional pre-K classrooms that are at the Bates Elementary School. Bentley's budget is actually budget neutral due to the fact that there's been some reallocations of positions, and also with a shorter school day, there was budget savings that allowed that to be budget neutral. For Carleton, there appears to be a budget increase. It's actually a more appropriate allocation of some of the district-wide related service providers that were charged to the district-wide budget and are now being more accurately classified to the schools where they're providing services. Horace Mann, big increase there is for teacher fellow stipends and also the reallocation of related service providers. So Horace Mann, on average, has 5 SSU Salem State teacher fellows, and we've increased those stipends dramatically to be more competitive with some of the other fellow programs and what other communities are paying for those staff. At Saltonstall, there's an additional 0.6 multilingual language teacher, again, due to the numbers of students. Wishcraft Heights, their proposal is budget neutral. Collins actually in a net has staffing reductions, so they also come in lower than what their salary increases would otherwise have them be. Salem High School is up 10.4%. That is driven, and the superintendent mentions this, about investments in CTE, 4 additional CTE positions, as well as additional program supplies and materials. New Liberty's budget proposal is budget neutral. Salem Prep actually declines due to the use of the special education tuition offset. And district administration, that looks like a significant decline. That is the district administration cost center is where the salary reserve line lives. And that salary reserve line was reduced by $400,000 this year. Regular day, that increase is actually mostly the shifting of a staff member from student and family supports. There was a staff member that was budgeted there that should have been budgeted to regular day. Special education, that 849,000 decline, 300,000 of that is additional circuit breaker revenue. And then 500,000 of it is allocating those district-wide related service providers back to the buildings. The MLE budget, again, we're correcting a misallocation of a building-based coach to a district-wide position. Instructional technology, we talked about 2 additional positions. Some of those will be offset by some revolving funds that we have. And then ESSER funded recurring expenses being transferred back to the budget. We're trying to slowly take those recurring expenses that were funded from ESSER and bring them back into the budget so we don't experience that funding cliff when the money is all spent. And then finally, operations and maintenance is driven in large part by the additional positions that were requested, 3 additional positions, bringing 2 of those positions off of the ESSER grant back into the budget. And 1 is a building, is a grounds maintenance position to assist with virtual field. We also talked about the $50,000 for preventative maintenance and money for security. So that's a high level snapshot of what's driving that at the cost center level. Just showing you here some of the allocations, our largest 3 cost centers, which make up 30% of the budget, Salem High, special education district-wide, and then operations and maintenance. And our 3 largest schools, not surprisingly, Salem High School, Collins, and Witchcraft Heights, which comprise 36% of the budget. So we want to take you through some of the requests. When all of the budgets were submitted, the total request was over 70 million. It was a 7.8% increase. We couldn't fund everything, but we're going to take you through the requests, what was included in the budget and what was not included in the budget once some priorities were established. So you can see the dual language positions, special ed, teachers and parents, CTE teachers, other classroom teachers, adjustment counselors, nursing staff. So the total ask was 23.6. We offset a lot of that with personnel reductions and also the use of offsets. And you can see the offsets off to the right in the slide. And so actually the net to the budget was a net negative, which means that there were enough offsets and savings found to completely offset the new personnel requests that were made. Those that were not included in the budget, you can see here there were 15.2 positions that were not funded. Some of these things are currently funded on ESSER and will remain on ESSER, and some of these things are just not able to be funded in this current year's budget given the financial constraints. And on the expense side of the house, the non-personnel, you can see what was included in the recommended budget. Again, there were some offsets here as well, so the net to the budget was just a little under $500,000. And about 128,000 in expenses that were not able to be funded. So you can see overall, all the district-wide cost centers, the non-school based, as a total is down 0.9%, so $207,000. Schools are up 7.5%. So the bulk of the increases, the bulk of the funding being requested is for the benefit of our schools. And the next slide just shows you the allocation to the different district-wide support cost centers. We kind of went through that in the line by line slide we had previously. In the next slide, you can see that of the district-wide support cost centers, that the largest one is special education.
Next one,
Yeah,
sorry.
you can see that special education is our largest of our district-wide support cost centers at 34%, followed by operations and maintenance, 27%, and then district administration at 14%. Special education and operation maintenance alone comprise 61% of these 7 district-wide cost centers. And at the school level, you can see that I mentioned the 3 largest schools, Salem High School, Collins, and Scrap Heights. Spend a little bit of time helping to get a picture, paint a picture of Chapter 70 aid. What you see in this chart is, I'll just explain what the different elements of the chart is. So the blue bars that you see in the chart is our foundation budget. This is the amount that the state requires Salem Public Schools to spend. It's based on our enrollment. It's based on different types of enrollment, elementary versus middle, enrollment of our ML students, our low-income students. So this is the required amount that we have to spend the foundation budget. The dotted line is the required net school spending, which essentially is the foundation budget. There are sometimes, like in 22, that's a little bit higher. The orange bar that you see is Chapter 70. That's our Chapter 70 state aid. And then the blue solid line is the amount that Salem actually spent, our actual net school spending. So you can see over the last 10 years that we've always spent more than the foundation budget and our required net school spending, on average about 27% more than what the foundation budget would have us spend. And just to talk a little bit about the last few years have been rather insane, but the 2020, in terms of the Chapter 70 formula, in 2020, with the passage of the Student Opportunity Act, Salem saw a significant increase in its foundation budget. It went up 9%, and you can see that FY20 line that bumps up in FY20. State aid also went up significantly, but 2021 comes along and our foundation budget actually decreased by 0.9%, and that was driven mostly by enrollment. Our enrollment went down by 2.1%, and because the foundation budget is based on enrollment, our foundation budget actually went down. Chapter 78 was level funded in that year. In FY22, the current year, our foundation budget increased slightly by 0.9%, despite a 4.9% decrease in enrollment. And our Chapter 78 barely moved, so it went up by 0.5%. And so FY23, these are preliminary numbers because the state budget has not yet been finalized. Our foundation budget actually increased by 4.6%, despite the fact that our enrollment dropped by 4.1%. And the reason that happened is because even though our enrollment decreased overall, our enrollment for the neediest students, so our low-income students, our special education students, that enrollment went up, our ML students as well. And so that increased need was captured in the foundation budget, but unfortunately, the Chapter 70 increase did not keep pace with that. It only went up by 0.5%, despite the fact that we clearly have a lot of need in terms of our students. So if you look at the next slide, this is what's called our target aid share. So the target aid share really determines how much, what percent of the foundation budget the state will pay to each community. And so back in 2016, we were about 49%. If you remember, the state, basically their allocation, when they set the foundation budget and when they set the wealth targets, they are looking for local cities and towns to pick up 59% of the cost, and the state overall to pick up 41% of the cost. And so we were right there at about that 41% mark. but over time, that target age share has declined pretty significantly. And so here we are looking at a 2023 target age share of 29.3%, meaning that the state is saying that they really only need to pick up about 29.3%. And the reason that is because the state formula makes it look like Salem is much wealthier than I think we would all say that Salem is. And when you look at our perceived health, we may look wealthy, but of the 351 communities in Massachusetts, we rank 205th for property value and 238th for per capita income. And that's what that formula, when it evaluates how much the community can pay, our ability to pay, it looks at wealth, property value, and income, as well as municipal growth. So this is the challenge that we have. Ordinarily, we would see a large increase, like 4.6% in our foundation budget, and we would see a comparable increase in our Chapter 70 money, so that we have more state funding to be able to fund those budget increases. That is not materialized this year. As a result, it's kind of put the strain on when you have a proposed increase of $3 million, but your Chapter 70 money is only increasing by $125,000. It's a little bit of a gap to be filled there. So therein lies the challenge. The next slide is just an overall budget summary, and just share with you, we have an adopted budget of 66.5 or $6 million. We had requests that totaled over $72 million. We were not able to obviously accommodate a 7.8% increase, but through a prioritization process that involved the finance subcommittee and the superintendent and the leadership team, we were able to prioritize those requests and reduce the recommended budget to 4.6%.
Good. Thank you, Mary. So just to close, I mean, I want to echo what Mary's saying. I mean, we don't believe that Salem's getting its fair share of dollars from the state. The mayor has been very, adamant talking to our delegation about that. And that started pre-pandemic and is now, continued. And it's going to be a problem, not just for this year, it's a potential problem, but it is for many years to come, because we are not, our need is not being recognized in a manner that is necessary for us to, properly fund education. We've also appreciated the partnership of the STU in those conversations as well, because the Student Opportunity Act, when it was first presented, we all had high hopes across the state, and I know Salem did as well, and it hasn't really delivered for us in the way that it needs to. And so, the city has been clear that unless there is additional funding coming from the state, which there is a movement in progress, and I know the mayor probably will speak to this momentarily, that it's going to be hard for the city to support this 4.6% increase that we're proposing here tonight. While we like to believe that there is there could be additional funding through the state budget process, we don't know for sure. And that is something that as a committee, and we're going to have to wrestle with in terms of what will ultimately be the number that what we're able to fund moving forward. While we think we went through a good process, and it was appreciate the school committee subcommittee that was part of that process, we also know there's a fiscal reality that extends beyond just the school district. And again, I'll let the mayor talk more about that as well. We are part of a city, and a city has its own finances that it needs to consider. So the final thoughts I'd say is this budget is linked to what I think our district values and our priorities. And I appreciate the school committee and the principals and the staff and the community that helped engage us in that process. Their input, along with sort of our guiding, our North Star, our guiding priorities, have led us to where we are here tonight. The focus has to be on classrooms and schools. More money is being directed at schools and classrooms. I mean, I think that's something we want to continue to do. I know it's, this district this budget isn't beefing up the central office. It is sending more money to schools and classrooms, especially in a time where there's desperate need, and there will be certainly for next year as well. I do think it's responsive to the input we received along the way. And I do note again here that city finances relative to state aid might necessitate a further review of this budget moving forward. I just want to share what comes next. There's a public budget hearing a week from today, May 2nd at 6 p.m. And then the school committee will have the option to discuss the budget further at the meeting next week. That starts at 7 o'clock. The hearing is at 6, the meeting's at 7. And then there's a scheduled vote. Right now, the scheduled vote is for Monday, May 16th. There are copies of the budget online. People can also request hard copies if they would like for the budget. The presentation this evening, I believe, is already up on the website, so people can see that as well. And then we will take feedback on at budget@salemk12.org, or you can email the superintendent's account. People have figured out how to find me, so I will certainly take all that feedback. And the last thing is, I like this quote: "The budget is not just a collection of numbers, but an expression of our values and aspirations." And I just want to remind folks that that's why we budget. It's not just it's got to be much more than just a numbers exercise, but it's got to speak loudly about what we value and care about as a school system. And so with that, the long presentation is over.
It's 11 o'clock.
Yeah, it's 11 o'clock. Celtics have started, I think, right, Mayor? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. Hopefully they're up by 11 at least now. Certainly want to take questions and comments. Thank the committee members, the finance committee, the city, the school staff who've worked on this, and also have to be a little bit of the adult in the room. And I think this is very much a stretch budget based on what we know right now with respect to finances. I love the statement that a budget is not just a collection of numbers, and it's a value statement, because I think it reflects the value that we have as a community put into education. You know, our current spending per pupil is over 21,000. I think we're the highest per pupil expenditures of any district in Essex County. I think we've really been committed to that as the most important work that we're doing. In addition to the budget that we all approve as school committee members, and ultimately the city council approves, there are a whole lot of other dollars on the city side of the budget that also benefit schools. Things like health insurance, unemployment, workers' compensation. The school district never sees those numbers, although the majority of expenditures in those categories relate to school and school employees. The capital projects, obviously, a ton of work going into things that we talked about there, the welcoming center to building upgrades. And then just, I would say, how would we call this? Items, the overhead expenditures, right? Munis, computers, public safety, none of those expenditures, although they're for the schools, are reflected in this budget. And this is a tough year for us. It's hard to imagine it's a tough year when you're thinking about ESSER dollars, but that Chapter 78, we're being treated as a minimum aid community at $30 per student. The last 3 years, the average increase in Salem Public Schools has been 4.9%. In FY20, it was a $2.2 million increase, 3.8%. In FY21, it was a 6% increase, just over a 6% increase, $3.6 million. Last year, it was a 4.96% increase, roughly $3.1 million. This year, we can't absorb a 4.6% increase and do the things that we have to do to support the city. We're going to significantly eat into the levy that we have available just to get to the 2.5 number. I think I gave you 2.25. We're trying to get to 2.5 and seeing what we can do to edge it up. I'll also say we have not put the city budget to bed. We're still working on that, trying to finalize our health insurance numbers. We're seeing upticks, as you can imagine, just like every one of us, and gas prices, inflations, escalation on contracts, things like that. So we have a gap I'm trying to close with our finance team on that end. And that gap incorporates a 2.5% increase for schools. So I don't want us to run into a problem of approving a budget that isn't actually going to get funded. Because right now, based on what we have that we know, and there's some unknowns, I want to be clear, we're closer in line to a 2.5% increase, maybe a little bit higher than that as we crunch these numbers. We'll try and obviously do as much as we can. But we're not a city that has disregarded our responsibilities to schools. We're, as I said, significant part of our budget, close to 70% of our budget is tied to education. But we do have other things we have to do in the city, and this year in particular, with such reduced local aid, there's no way we can absorb a 4.6% increase. And I think we should be honest about that, as opposed to creating chaos I don't want to create chaos because I think there's some unknowns, but as we go forward with budget hearings and the like, I want to reflect the fact that right now, we don't have a way to afford this top line number. I think we need to work together to try and address what that would mean. And we are working closely with our state delegation, both Senator Lovely and Representative Tucker, to understand what opportunities we have within the current statewide process. The state has not put their budget to bed yet either. So there's some unknowns, but I've always hoped for the best, but plan for the worst. Especially when it comes to financing, we in this district know what happens in the past when that was not done here. And I don't want to go backwards. I want us to be both professional and transparent with respect to how we're approaching budgets. And when there are uncertainties, I certainly want to be open and upfront about them. Certainly also would love to hear from anybody else. If there are questions or comments or other thoughts folks want to bring to bear. We'll obviously have a public hearing in a couple of weeks, but I am concerned that we're marching down a path anticipating a number that may not necessarily be there for us at the end. And I don't know when the tough part about this is the mechanics of how the state approves their budget, when their funding will be finalized, and when we'll know about whether or not there's additional resource opportunities for us there. Mr. Curtis.
Thank you, Mayor Driscoll. And I was a part of those conversations 2 years ago prior to the pandemic with the chairs with respect to SOA and kind of where Salem landed. So I was just wondering, Mayor, if you could just shed a little bit more light as to whether or not the conversations at the state level are regarding either an amendment within the two budgets, or if it's more of a different calculation from House Ways and Means that would probably, or Senate Ways and Means that would net Salem with additional state dollars. I'm just curious about kind of the approach that we are engaging in.
Yeah, all of the above, I would say at this point. We've really, Representative Tucker and Senator Lovely have really taken the lead. They've been strong partners in this, trying to understand where the insertion point could be helpful. We've tried to do the backwards mapping to understand this formula. I mean, every other gateway city is getting a substantial increase, even communities next door to us that are not gateway cities. The city of Beverly's increase, I think, is $2.2 million. They're not a gateway city. So there's something in the way that formula works that is not working in our favor. And it's important that we figure this out, because this is going to have impacts, not just this year, but years down the road. And we've worked with DOR, we've sat down with folks at DESE, of the gateway communities. I mean, we've done a ton of work on this to make our case. I think half the gateway cities have also seen a decrease in enrollment. So it's not just about the enrollment decline. We thought maybe it was tied to the power plant, the way that revenue was categorized, that DOR has run that up the tree, and it's not that. So we're not sure why it's happening. I wish I had, this is exactly what the problem is. There's an error in this formula and it needs to be fixed. We haven't been able to determine that. And those of us who are familiar with how that formula works, there's a lot of information that gets put in the blender, and then what gets spit out is hard to actually pinpoint to one particular item. We just know what the results are, and the results are we're the only gateway city getting an increase of a magnitude that's less than 1%. And frankly, with many of the surrounding communities we've looked at, just in nearby communities, everybody else, folks are in 7-digit increases. And we're getting, I think it's up to in the House now, $300,000 increase. So that's helpful. They increased it slightly, but it's nowhere near the need, and it certainly is nowhere near the comparisons to other communities, ones that look like us, ones that are nearby us. And so we really do feel like we have a strong case to make. And I think our legislators are 100% with us. It's just not in any one person's control. There's a process that has to be followed. And it's very much an ask at this point, not a certainty.
Thank you for that context, Mayor Driscoll. And I think it's really important to highlight that uncertainty is really hard to overcome, especially in a year in which the legislature is grappling with how they're going to plan for their own fiscal cliff. And I know that there's a lot of different asks that are out around these pieces. So just appreciated you shedding a little bit of light about what's kind of happening behind the scenes. And certainly, I think as a committee, we've expressed support for SOA when this process started with our partners at STU when they came before us with that resolution and trying to seek out the funding. So if there's anything else that we could be doing, Mayor Driscoll, I'd love to bring that conversation to the state level as well. There is one consideration that I was curious about, Mayor, if it had come up at all in your conversations. The last time we sat down with the chairs, they had talked about our enrollment with respect to our CTE programs. There was a decline, I think, that initial year that we came forth, and now we're seeing an increase in the CTE programming. So you get kind of that double count of the Chapter 74 and then the Chapter 70 dollars. Did they weigh that at all as they were taking a look at whether or not to provide us with an increase this year, just because we're seeing such growing numbers?
I don't know, but it's all arrears, right? They look at your enrollment last year. Like, I have no doubt that our enrollment's going to go back up this year. A lot of districts saw, folks not sending kids to kindergarten or declining certain acceptance in schools with everything that was going on with COVID. But it's all looked at in arrears. So what did you have last year, even though we made some increases this year? There may certainly be some options for some of our programs to benefit from Chapter 74, but it's not baked into this either package we've seen so far.
Understood. Thank you.
Happy to move on the agenda if there are no other questions, but this is an important issue that I don't want to be left wrestling with this on the last minute. We're going to continue to do everything we can to, scratch, kick, and scream our way to the top of the list. Yeah, Ms. Cornell.
I have two questions, I think. I think one is for Mary. The thing that I am concerned about is sort of how we meet our basic obligations as a district at that, meet that level service number that we talked about at 2.25.
Yeah, I mean, at 2.25, you would be talking about not funding any of the new requests. And you would be looking at reducing staffing. Anything less than 3.8%, I think, would require, obviously not funding any of the new things, but anything below that would require staff reductions.
And I think this question is for the mayor, which is to what extent Recovery Act money that the city is sitting on is potential, could potentially be applied to our budget.
Yeah, I think that we are going to be using Recovery Act dollars to benefit a number of areas. I would have two concerns. One, about the eligibility. Like, there are some requirements within ARPA. I mean, frankly, there's ESSER money that we could tap into that's sort of the school's federal ARPA dollars. I would be concerned about that creating a larger cliff for next year if we don't get this figured out. So every dollar that we would take from those one-time revenue streams only creates a larger challenge for next year. I mean, we're going to be tapping into the levy. There are limitations on what you can use your ARPA funding for. Some of it will come into play, or probably on the capital side, to be honest, than on the operational side. But I do think it's not a long-term strategy at all.
Right, and we talked about this on the subcommittee as well. And so, Mary, I was wondering if you could speak to this as well. This sort of, if we're asking for, this sort of one-time ask. I need these explained to me over and over again with sort of what all these terms mean, but we had that same concern. So I was wondering if you could just sort of share what you discussed with us in terms of this sort of, I may not be phrasing it correctly, if you want to help me.
Sure. One of the things we talked about is the unique nature of the funding this year and why some of this really is not necessarily a funding, like building on a funding cliff, but very much a one-time situation. So I know that we've talked at length about that at finance. I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more for the public and for the larger committee as well. But
yes, thank you. Sure. I mean, historically, my 20 months here. I mean, looking back at the numbers in the past, it looks like the sort of level service budget that you would typically see in Salem is somewhere in the 2 to 2.9% range. But because of the fact that there's this structural deficit, because FY22 did not contain enough funding to cover the increases in 22, obviously we're trying to absorb that increase internally through not having to go for a supplemental appropriation. If we had gone for a supplemental, it would have been about $500,000, which would have then increased the base. I think once you take care of this year, in the future, given what the COLA increases are that are settled, you will see your level service budget returning back to more of a 2.9% increase rather than the 3.8% you're seeing this year.
I mean, the history that I have is that the last 3 years, it's been an average of a 4.9% increase, 3.8, 6.0, 4.9. So, I mean, we have strived to provide resources to schools and they need it. And we just are running out of, we can't continue when we're already spending 21,000 per pupil. We are eating tremendously into the levy. There is a capacity issue. If there's a need for one-time revenues, there certainly are ESSER dollars that could be used. I think it's just very dangerous to set up a bigger gap for next year. So that would be my concern, like how do you sustain this growth? Look, we're hoping to get some answers with the legislature and figure this out. I think that the prickly point is like, okay, the here and now is here and now. Over the next few weeks, we may not have an answer by the time we have to finalize a budget. And I certainly don't feel comfortable submitting a budget to the city council that calls for an increase that we don't have the resources to support. So, you know, I think there's some mechanics that we need to think about as a school committee about where there could be further reductions if there are some one-time revenues using ESSER dollars for that. But oof, it's not a great, it's not a fiscally prudent approach for any long period of time. That's for sure. Yep, Ms. Campbell.
Just a clarification question. When Ms. Delai was listing percent increases, those were the percent increases for a level service budget. The percent increases you're listing.
For budget, year-over-year budget increases.
Exactly. So I'm just clarifying that those are two separate figures. It's not. So I think the point is that were we in a typical year to do a standard level service budget without these significant contractual increases and without the structural deficit, we would be looking at a figure that's a little bit more in line, and which is what that's the unusual part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say yes and no, knowing a little bit about the school budget. There have been turnbacks in years. So, you know, I would also say there's some float within that budget at the end of the fiscal year that comes back to the city. So, I mean, we could do some more digging on it, but doesn't change where we are right now, yes.
Right, just a point of clarification in case
Sure.
people were wondering.
So, Ms. Manning, sorry, my peripheral vision now is being challenged. Yep. I know.
It's just sort of a procedural question. The money that we're hoping will be increased from the state, right, that, you know, the Senator Worley and Peltec were working on. Is there, what would happen if like our budget gets decided on an amount and submitted, and then they increase that money? What do they look? Is it like by settling on a smaller budget? I would take a chance to build, then the folks that they're trying to work with would look at it and say, well, see, they got the budget done. They didn't need it. Or is there also any danger that if they did get an increase, we had already, you know, committed to a budget and it went to the council and so on? Could we still get that money into the schools, or is that money too late to come into our budget for the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the mechanics are, we're working to see what kind of remedies might exist at the state level. If it were to come in, it would obviously go to the schools, the additional resources. But I don't think the state is going to say, oh, see, they made all these drastic cuts and balanced the budget, so they don't need this anymore. I don't see that scenario playing out. It's a mechanics issue. It really is. It's sort of like we have to approve a budget. We're not going to know what the state's going to be able to help us out with until probably after our budget
But if
has
they
to
did
be
help us
approved.
out,
It would come back. Yeah,
come back to
absolutely.
the school.
Yeah, for sure. And so it's that middle time period of not knowing and not wanting to be disingenuous and say, oh, let's just keep marching ahead and assume that we're going to get something. And then we're going to have a problem in July or August, and not wanting to create havoc and be an alarmist if in fact we're going to get some resources and know that. So that's kind of the quandary, to be honest. Yep, Ms. Stanning.
Is there a date out there that
it would have to happen by, like, I'm just questioning when you said July or August, could it literally?
It really comes
Be
down to
increased
when the
back then?
legislature approves the budget. I mean, in
So-
COVID years, we did get the budget approved until November, December. If there's a rock'em sock'em,
Yeah.
dispute happening, July would be, I would say, a good timeline. But it wouldn't shock me if it went to August,
The state
right?
budget,
Yeah.
the first year of the pandemic went all the way to December. And so,
Yeah.
the uncertainty
think about
with their process, I mean, it's,
Yeah,
They
it's
have
hard
to
to
agree.
nail it down.
Alright.
Yeah, it's hard to pin down a specific day. I mean, we know for sure it won't be before July. I mean, that's typically.
Alright.
So I think, we need to have some conversations, I think, a lot of the mechanics offline of what we can do about it. Because I'm struggling as well. I don't want to certainly put our district in a position to make drastic cuts that would not be necessary, nor do I want to assume we're going to get resources that don't exist, and then we're in another, sort of a quandary. And so I think, and we're still trying to put our budget to bed, so we got a little bit of time. I guess we should flag the potential to put off our vote on May 16th, because we may want more time. We may want to wait till we're closer to better understanding of where we stand with a potential remedy. And so I just think that's important. Mr. Cruz and then Ms. Manning.
so to that end, Mayor Driscoll, the Senate typically finishes their budget process the last week of May. The House is probably going to be done by Thursday. Are you proposing that we move that vote perhaps closer to the end of May?
I think that might make some sense. I gotta really look at these numbers and look at the timeline. And we have to get a budget. I still have to get a budget into the city council by a certain date, so we have to have a number in that. I always, is this a budget and there's a stretch budget? How do we think about that? But there are mechanics on operations side that could make that tricky. So we got some work to do to unpack this a little bit more. Ms. Manning?
That's what I was gonna ask. What's the date you have to get a budget to the council?
Yeah, we,
I thought it was May 1st.
we typically have a budget into the council for their, usually their second meeting in May. That's what we target. And there have been a couple of years where we frankly haven't had the school budget put to bed yet. And we submitted it with kind of a placeholder number and then we approved it. They don't really like it when we do that. So I prefer to submit it. I mean, there are times when, they're getting it on Thursday and we're voting on Monday. But ideally, it'd be nice to have those synced up, but, obviously more conversations to have. Anything else on this? We could do a group lottery ticket, that might help us this year. I mean, I think the real, shame for me is this whole Student Opportunity Act was geared towards exactly district like ours to make sure we had the resources. I think we're all excited about what the opportunities we could utilize those dollars for. I mean, districts around us have a dizzying amount of money, gateway cities around us, and necessary, like being able to do a lot of things, many of whom were nowhere near $21,000 per student, in terms of spending. So they're going to be doing some catch up and investing in some areas that we, want to maintain. And so we're working it hard to try and get some solutions, but I don't like to be the bearer of bad news, but do I want us to all engage in a really lengthy process and then have the rug pulled out from us under us at the last minute either. So I think that's the challenge. So we can get the finance teams working to try to understand the mechanics where and how we can land this thing and better understand dates, timelines, and ways we might need to be able to work together.
I know that there have been sometimes in the past that it's okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to, that's something you
Yeah,
can see.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, anything else? We'll keep moving along if there's no other comments or questions or I'll go home and paint the windows black. All right. Okay.
Thanks, Mayor. And thank you to the school principals and directors who are on tonight. You guys are free to leave this meeting. I appreciate you being here. You're certainly welcome to stay for all the fun and games we're going to have now. But thank you for your participation. Just a couple of other things I want to note. There is a vote here, submission of a statement of interest to the MSBA for a core repair program for Salem High School. I want to thank Ms. Delai for her hard work in putting that together, and then our custodial team, the high school team. who did that. Obviously, we went through a master facility study that helped prime the pump for this. We are, we feel like our statement is stronger than it's been. That being said, we don't know what will happen, and we're asking for to be entered into the pipeline to look at the possibility of a new facility at the Salem High School site. So tonight, we just before break, I went to the city council asking for their support, and they voted unanimously to support moving forward with a statement of interest. And we're asking the school committee this evening later on to do the same. We did provide you with a draft of our submission, and the deadline is Friday, I believe, at midnight. Is that right? Or 11:59? Oh, 5 o'clock. Well, I don't know why I thought 11:59, but it just sounds a lot cooler to say you have to get it in before. We want, we need your vote and support to move forward. It doesn't commit any dollars to the city, but allows us to be considered to enter the pipeline. So we'll be asking for that later. And I don't know if anybody has any questions about that. You've been through that before, I think. So just two other quick things. There's a MOU for the technology agreement between the city and the schools. I believe that you voted on that in the past. And the update is what I mentioned before, that we are going to be, we work with Matt Killen and the city team so that we will be taking over the responsibility of the devices for staff now as well. And so there's a revised MOU in your packet. We'd like to get your support with that later on. And then finally, I did want to honor what we had discussed a few meetings ago. Can't believe we're talking about masks again, but we did say we'd come back and talk about masks for the students in pre-K, students under 5. I did, myself and Chelsea Banks had an opportunity to meet with our health advisors over break. Unfortunately, Dr. Pangallo was unable to join us for that meeting, but we did have the other members of the advisory group there. And their recommendation at this time was to continue masking for students who are under the age of 5 in our pre-K classrooms. And I do appreciate the fact that our students and staff have maintained that those guidelines. And I don't know what the committee wants to do moving forward. It's not up for vote. I just wanted to relay that was the conversation that we had with the health advisors. They just felt like at this point, that our plan seemed to be, I don't know, working is right, but that they suggested that we continue the course, that they thought that the course that we had decided on was the appropriate one, given that children under the age of 5 still cannot be vaccinated. So those conclude my comments, Mayor, for this evening.
Any questions or comments for Dr. Zrak with respect to any of the matters we just covered? Mr. Cruz?
In just response to the last piece there on the pre-K, I'll just reiterate my comfort level remains the same with respect to our little ones under 5 not having access to the vaccine, and so certainly believe that that's a great recommendation, and has my support.
Thank you, Ms. Manning. Is your hand up?
I know, I think I had made that original motion to keep the masks on until we came back after, and so I appreciate the advice of the council coming back to us. I still think it's a good move, so glad we're doing it. And I just wanted to make sure that we have a plan to get the word out to the parents this week. That was the arrangement was after the 1 week. So we need to make sure we notify them. Not that everybody is watching tonight, but there may be a couple, so you gotta get that.
Thank you, Ms. Manning. Anybody else? All right, I'll keep us moving on the agenda. Report, I don't think Alwa is here this evening.
And just she's not able to be with us. She's currently, I believe, interviewing for a scholarship. So sending positive energy over to Awa tonight, as hopefully she'll be awarded a scholarship this evening.
Excellent. Yeah, good reason not to be here. Action items. I don't think we have any old business. I don't see. I think we do. Ms. Cornell?
I actually have a question, sort of a procedural question. In the policies, I know this is also a subcommittee issue, but we did talk about the student advisory group scholarship a little bit last time. And the policy subcommittee did vote to move that scholarship ahead for a first read, but it didn't make the agenda. So I'm not sure if we just push that off until.
It's not on the agenda. We can't really deliberate on it under the open meeting law. So we'll have to put it on the agenda at the next meeting.
May 2nd,
Yeah.
yep.
Action items under new business. We have a deliberation and vote to authorize the submission of the statement of interest to the Massachusetts School Building Association for the core repair program for Salem High School. Obviously, folks can read the priorities here. Mr. Fleming.
Move the adoption of the language submitted to us. And
Could you just, just one friendly amendment somebody could offer? There was an error here. Thank you, Ann, for catching that. The date says April 25th, 2002. It should say 2022. We'll make that correction. But just-
friendly amendment is accepted to the motion, and I hereby move for acceptance of the language before us.
Thank you. Motion made by Mr. Fleming. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Manning. I just, under discussion, want to call out quickly, you know, how grateful I am for the folks who participated in our facilities master planning effort, to put us in a better position to hopefully have our Salem High School statement of interest adopted by MSBA or put us in the queue. We've been submitting our statement of interest for a number of years for what we called phase 2 of Salem High. And every year we're beat out by folks who have, you know, classrooms that are overrun, just other needs that meet the MSBA standards in a way that doesn't allow us to advance. We're hoping with the work we funded and put in on the school facilities master plan, we've laid the groundwork for them to understand why this investment is so necessary, in addition to the need, sort of some of the programmatic angles there. So grateful for everyone who worked on that and hopeful that we can do some follow-up on this. So motion's been made and seconded. Anything further on this?
I just say we're hopeful to get MSBA to come out to Salem in the near future to look at the facility, and there, I hope we can, you know, we can walk the building with them.
Work some magic.
Work some magic, yeah.
Great. Anything further? Seeing none, all those in favor?
I'd just like to call for a roll call on this one.
Okay. I will entertain, I guess I'll call the roll. We don't have our school committee secretary here to do that. I can do that. All those in favor of submission of our statement of interest to the MSBA for core repair programs at Salem High School, please say aye. Ms. Manning,
Yes, I,
Mr. Fleming,
Aye.
Dr. Pangallo is absent, Ms. Nuncio, that's the wrong headline, sorry, Ms. Cornell. Aye. Ms. Campbell,
Yeah.
Mr. Cruz.
Mr. Cruz,
Aye.
Mayor Driscoll, yes, 6 members voting, 6 in the affirmative, the matter carries. Sorry, had some old letterhead there, guys, apologies. We're all discombobulated when you put us back in a room together. Next item would be the deliberation and vote to approve the IT MOU, memorandum of understanding.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Fleming, seconded by Mr. Cruz. Dr. Wright, could you just give an overview of that? Would you not? Would you?
Yeah, no, it's pretty simple. The biggest change from what was already existed was that now oversight of the staff devices will be our IT department. We're taking that back from the city, or, I mean, it was part of the discussion a few years ago when we started overseeing student devices, that eventually that the staff devices and the maintenance of that. Mark's built a strong team, and we feel like it makes sense to have everything under one roof. And we've been working with Matt Killen and his team. And so Matt's had an opportunity to look at this. Mark has had an opportunity to look at this. Mark, I don't know if you want to add anything to that at all, since you're here.
Yeah, I think it's a staff.
You need to come to.
You gotta come to a mic, yeah.
So yeah, it's staff, it will be staff equipment, so it's the purchase, deployment and support of staff equipment, which is predominantly the laptops that they have, as well as classroom equipment. So all the presentation equipment, projectors, sound systems, document cameras, things like that would all come under my team's purview. The things that will remain with the city will be services that are shared among the entire city, which would be mostly phone network, Wi-Fi, the phone system, which is part of the network, and Munis. But other than that, we would take all the rest of it.
And is Matt signed off on this MOU? Who's reviewed with him? I just haven't had a chance to. connect
Yeah,
with
he
him.
has. Yep, he has signed off on this MOU. Yep, we've worked with him for, it's been a couple months now that we've been reviewing this. Yeah, it's not substantial changes to what was already in there. It's really what Mark just described.
Any other comments or questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, I think a motion's been made and seconded on this. All those in favor? All those opposed? The ayes have it. Next item would be the deliberation and vote to accept a $1,600 donation from Toys for Tots Literacy UPS Book Drive. Motion made by Mr. Fleming. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Campbell. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? All those opposed? The ayes have it. I don't think we have a finance report, right? There's nothing this particular meeting, so we'll move on to our subcommittee reports. Discussion regarding policy 3601, our student transportation services. Policy subcommittee has taken this up and would like to offer some additional commentary. Thank you.
We have gotten a lot of feedback from
Yes, we have.
community members, and so we have made a few changes which are indicated in the packet. Right.
It's a separate document that everybody should have. Yeah.
One of the changes that we made came from a discussion that we had as a subcommittee about language around the 3 tiers, and rather than sort of having unsafe zones, we changed that language to walkable route access. We had a brief discussion with council, and we just need to get that in writing, that was sort of legally a better wording. It's also in line with what other districts call, have as their criteria. Walkable routes is something that a lot of other communities use. The second, well, I should probably stop in case anybody has a question about that.
Any questions with respect to the change in language to walk? Yeah, anybody need the white line version? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
In order to be totally transparent about how the criteria were assessed, students, in the event that more students apply for non-mandatory ridership than there are seats available, we sort of needed a tiebreaker. And that tiebreaker is going to give priority to students who live the greatest distance from their school. The third change, and this is, we heard directly back from parents, is sort of to give kind of special priority to 6th graders who are, in a transition period, particularly our 6th graders at Collins. We made a change so that students in grades 3 to 6, as opposed to 3 to 5, who live between 1 and 1.5 miles, could enter into that tiered system. And they could also, students in K through 6 who live under 1 mile could appeal and seek a special exemption from the superintendent. So prior to that, we had 6 through 12 students who lived under 1.5. So we're just including the 6th graders with the K through 5s now. And I believe that is the only language change. We talked quite a bit today about really doing an assessment of our crossing guards, our walkable routes, and that this is sort of going to be an ongoing project to, assure families that we're really thinking carefully about their children's safety and what's most reasonable for families. I think that is the last piece. The last thing is we would like to push, we were going to ask for a 3rd read this evening, but we're going to ask to push that off until the next meeting so that parents have an opportunity to read through these changes and provide more feedback if they have it.
Great. Any questions or comments from Ms. Cornell or the superintendent on this matter?
With the table.
Can we have the table, Mr. Fleming? I just think it's not being moved forward.
We're going to
It's
table it.
scheduled for 3rd reading.
I don't think it's on our agenda for a 3rd reading. That's why I don't think we need to table it, but I'm sorry.
Nice discussion.
Yeah, just as for discussion, right? So So it wasn't necessarily up for that third reading, so I think we're okay with leaving it there and we'll put it back on the agenda. I'm sorry, guys. Just give me 1 second here. Yep, there we got it. The other thing on this, just while we're on the topic of transportation, was trying to identify ways that we could work as a district to support students who are working, walking, or riding their bikes, even incentivizing that type of behavior. I mean, there are lots of districts who have successfully implemented walking school buses and routes like that. I think that could be an opportunity with some investment to support, adults who meet at a certain location and then walk to school as a group or ride bikes to school as a group. And wondering if there's any thought been given to that by the district, or did that come up in the policy discussions?
We talked a little bit about that today, sort of how we can get some community input around that. And I think the parent advisory committee, once we really start engaging that group of people, is going to be important to that conversation, giving us some input. But I've done a little bit of research. Needham is a really interesting community that has a pretty robust bike walk to school program. You have to get a license to ride your bike to school in Needham. It's pretty involved. So there are a lot of communities out there that we can use as models.
Okay. Ms. Manning?
I remember they did do that at one point, and I was trying this afternoon in the meeting, and I still can't remember the name of the program, but there was a group that came in and schools signed up and had routes and people, and it was, very similar to what you're talking about. And it worked for a while. So many things to figure out.
Yeah, I think it'd be one of those things where you almost have to have a staff person who's paid to do it and to make sure it's consistent and happening, like we have crossing guards, relying on volunteers to take that on. And I mean, the city's only 8 square miles, so I do think like we could enhance walking and biking and consistent with our mobility goals, but it really is having somebody who's going to be there every day that you can count on to help. And I think that's but it feels like very worthwhile to invest in that. If there's a parent advisory council, if there's folks who would be interested in taking on a task like that, certainly it makes some sense for us to explore it. So. Okay, school committee concerns and resolutions. Ms. Campbell.
Sorry, I was just thinking about this exact discussion in terms of school choice and how some of the decisions that families may be making in regards to the school that they're selecting, depending on how familiar they are with the school by the time their youngster hits kindergarten, they may or may not be aware of, even though a school might be the closest, if it's across a major road, it may not be the safest route walking wise. So I'm just thinking about that in terms of, I wonder if that's some additional information we could supply families with, like I'm thinking about, for example, Bentley and Carlton are very close to one another, but for some families, Bentley is mileage wise further, but it's a very easy walking path down around Collins Cove, whereas Carlton would be across Bridge Street, making it a more dangerous, less walkable commute. And so maybe there's an aspect of that in terms of how we navigate that process with families and helping them identify schools that are very safe and very walkable, especially with little ones.
Sure. Ms. Cornell?
And we did talk about this today. This is something that I'm really interested in, is having some sort of transparent mapping for parents about where crossing guards exist. So that you can look at our website and know kind of what those intersections are, what those safe routes are.
I mean, for folks who are concerned about transportation, it may make them think twice about picking a school that's further away from where they live, and that might be a happy byproduct out of this, right? All right, so school committee concerns and resolutions. Ms. Manning?
I just want to acknowledge that it is also Mary July's first meeting, but I don't want to have her get away with nobody mentioned.
Okay.
It's a great one.
Right, that's-
Yeah, exactly. We got the nameplate.
We thanked you for like 5 projects tonight, but we can actually say first time.
Thank you, Ms. Manning, for recognizing that. Any other school committee concerns and resolutions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Ms. Campbell, seconded by Mr. Cruz. All those in favor? Adjournment, all those opposed? The ayes have it.
I always just send it.